What if I told you that Sir Anthony Hopkins' routine visit to his childhood piano teacher's home in Port Talbot would unravel a mystery that had haunted the Welsh town for decades? When the Oscar-winning actor discovered his beloved mentor living in deteriorating conditions, battling dementia, and abandoned by his own daughter, he knew he had to act. But what Hopkins didn't expect was to find hidden sheet music that would change everything. Compositions that held the key to healing not just his teacher's broken mind, but the lives of countless others. How could a simple piano lesson from 40 years ago lead to one of the most extraordinary acts of gratitude ever documented? And why did his former teacher's daughter disappear on the night of her biggest performance, never to touch a piano again? The truth would leave even Hopkins speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the misty embrace of Port Talbot, where industrial smokestacks pierce Welsh clouds like ancient sentinels, Sir Anthony Hopkins stands before a weathered Victorian house that once echoed with the delicate notes of piano lessons and youthful dreams. The distinguished actor's return to his childhood hometown isn't merely a nostalgic journey. It's a mission born of gratitude and urgency. What compels a man of his stature to leave behind the glamour of Hollywood for this humble corner of Wales? The answer lies in the fading memories of an old piano teacher who shaped not just his future, but the destinies of countless others. Sir Anthony's polished shoes crunch on the gravel pathway leading to Mr. Gareth Davies' home, each step stirring memories of the nervous young boy he once was, clutching sheet music as he approached these same steps for his weekly lessons. The house, once a beacon of musical inspiration in the community, now stands in silent decay. Paint peels from the window frames like autumn leaves, and the garden where students once waited, their turn has surrendered to wilderness. Through the grimy windows, he catches glimpses of Sarah Jenkins moving about inside, her dedication to Mr. Davies' care evident in her gentle movements. She's more than just a caretaker. She's another thread in the complex tapestry of lives touched by the old piano teacher. When she opens the door to greet Sir Anthony, her eyes reflect both relief and worry. The situation, she explains in hushed tones, has grown more challenging. Mr. Davies' dementia has accelerated, and the house itself has become as fragile as its owner's memories. Inside, the familiar scent of aged wood and sheet music still lingers, though now mingled with the mustiness of decay. The grand piano, once the centerpiece of countless lessons, stands silent under a layer of dust, its keys yellowed like ancient ivory. Sir Anthony approaches it with reverence, remembering how Mr. Davies would sit there, straight-backed and precise, guiding young hands through scales and sonatas with infinite patience. Mr. Davies himself sits in a worn armchair by the window, his once commanding presence now diminished by time and illness. He looks up at Sir Anthony with polite confusion, showing no recognition of the boy who once struggled through Chopin under his tutelage. This lack of recognition strikes deeper than Sir Anthony had prepared for, yet strengthens his resolve to help the man who had once helped him find his voice through music. Sarah shares the daily challenges she faces, from maintaining the deteriorating house to managing Mr. Davies' increasingly unpredictable behavior. But it's the absence of Olivia, Mr. Davies' daughter, that weighs heaviest on the atmosphere. The story of their estrangement emerges in fragments, a series of misunderstandings calcified into years of silence. Sir Anthony learns that Olivia hasn't visited in over a decade, her absence as prominent as a missing note in a familiar melody. The situation demands more than just financial intervention. Sir Anthony begins making calls, starting with Mark Evans, another former student whose construction company could address the house's structural needs. Mark's own story, from troubled youth to successful businessman under Mr. Davies' guidance, mirrors the transformative power of their old teacher's influence. As the Welsh afternoon dims into evening, Sir Anthony and Sarah discuss plans for the house's renovation. But both know that restoring these walls is only part of the solution. The greater challenge lies in rebuilding the broken bridges between father and daughter, in helping a man who taught so many to find harmony rediscover it in his own life. Can the student now become the teacher, helping to orchestrate a reunion between Mr. Davies and Olivia before the music of memory fades completely? The weight of this responsibility settles on Sir Anthony as he prepares to leave, watching Sarah guide Mr. Davies to his evening routine. The house may be in disrepair, but within its walls lies a story of influence, gratitude, and the enduring impact of one person's dedication to teaching. As he steps back into the Port Talbot evening, Sir Anthony begins to formulate a plan that will require all his diplomatic skills and the cooperation of a community bound together by the legacy of an extraordinary teacher. The late autumn rain pelted against the windows of the modest Welsh home as Sir Anthony Hopkins stood in the doorway, his heart heavy at the sight before him. Sarah Jenkins, a woman in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and weathered hands, led him through the cramped corridor toward the sitting room where his former mentor waited. "He has good days and bad days, Sir Anthony," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying years of practiced patience. "Today might be challenging. He's been asking about his old piano students all morning, but the names get mixed up in his mind." The sitting room, once filled with the sounds of scales and sonatas, now held only the tick-tock of an ancient grandfather clock and the shallow breathing of Mr. Gareth Davies. The elderly man sat in a worn armchair, his fingers moving across the armrest in a familiar pattern, playing invisible keys to a melody only he could hear. "Mr. Davies?" Anthony called softly, moving into the man's line of sight. "It's Anthony Hopkins." The old piano teacher's eyes, once sharp and commanding, now held a misty confusion. He looked up at Anthony with polite interest, but no recognition sparked in his gaze. "Are you here for your lesson? I'm afraid I'm rather behind schedule today." Sarah shot Anthony a sympathetic glance as she busied herself straightening the room's few photographs. Among them was a dusty image of a young woman with Mr. Davies's same determined chin. Olivia, the daughter who hadn't spoken to her father in 15 years. "No, sir," Anthony replied, carefully settling into a nearby chair. "I came to thank you. You taught me many years ago, and those lessons shaped my entire life." Mr. Davies nodded absently, his fingers still dancing across the armrest. "Music shapes us all, doesn't it? Like water shapes the stones in a river. Are you familiar with Chopin's Nocturnes?" Before Anthony could respond, Davies launched into a detailed analysis of the piece, his mind clearly retreating to more comfortable territory. The technical precision of his commentary revealed glimpses of the brilliant instructor he'd once been, even as his thoughts wandered and circled back on themselves. Sarah quietly approached with a cup of tea for Davies, her movements suggesting years of carefully choreographed care. "He still remembers every note of every piece he ever taught," she explained in a low voice. "The music stays when other memories fade." Anthony watched as his former teacher accepted the tea with trembling hands, noting how the once imposing man had shrunk into himself. Where was the instructor who had demanded excellence with every keystroke? The mentor who had seen potential in a working-class boy from Port Talbot and pushed him toward greatness? "Mark Evans was asking about you just yesterday," Sarah mentioned, testing the waters of Davies's memory. "You remember Mark? He's become quite successful in construction now." Davies's brow furrowed. "Mark? Yes, troubled boy. Always rushing the tempo. Did he ever master that Bach invention?" The moment of clarity vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and Davies returned to his invisible piano playing. Anthony exchanged glances with Sarah, understanding dawning about the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just about repaying an old debt. It was about preserving the dignity of a man who had given so much to others. "What does he need?" Anthony asked Sarah, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, years of managing alone making it difficult to ask for help. "The house is falling apart around him. The roof leaks, the heating's unreliable, and the piano." She glanced at the corner where an old upright stood, its keys yellowed and silent. "He hasn't been able to play for years, but he won't let anyone move it." Anthony's mind was already forming plans, remembering Mark Evans' construction company and the resources at his disposal. But as he watched Davies conduct an imaginary orchestra from his armchair, he knew the physical repairs were only part of the solution. "What about Olivia?" he asked, noting how Sarah's expression tightened at the name. Last we heard, she was in London. But Mr. Davies needs more than just his daughter's forgiveness. He needs understanding, care, and connection to the life he once had. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Anthony sat with his former teacher, listening to him describe chord progressions and finger positions with perfect clarity, while unable to remember the face of the student sitting before him. How many other lives had this man touched? How many other students carried his teachings in their hearts? As the autumn wind rustled through the overgrown garden, Sarah Jenkins emerged from the side door of Mr. Davies's house, her medical bag clutched tightly against her chest. Her eyes widened with recognition at the sight of Sir Anthony Hopkins, standing on the worn pathway. Who could forget the prodigy who had once filled these halls with Chopin's nocturnes? "Sir Anthony?" Sarah called out, her voice carrying a mix of surprise and relief. I wondered if someone from the old days would eventually find their way back here. She approached him, her practical shoes crunching against the gravel. As a former student herself, she understood the magnetic pull that drew them all back to their beloved teacher. The conversation that followed revealed the painful descent of their mentor. Sarah had been caring for Mr. Davies for the past 3 years, watching as dementia gradually erased the brilliant mind that had once guided so many young musicians. "It started with small things," she explained, her voice heavy with emotion. He would forget which piece he was teaching, then which student he was speaking to. Now, most days he doesn't remember he was ever a teacher at all. Anthony listened intently, his mind racing with questions about how their mentor had reached this state. Where was his family? What about his daughter, Olivia? The answers Sarah provided painted a picture of isolation that seemed impossible for someone who had touched so many lives. Olivia had disappeared from her father's life years ago, leaving no forwarding address or means of contact. "The house is becoming as fragmented as his memories," Sarah continued, gesturing to the peeling paint and sagging gutters. "I've tried to maintain what I can, but on a nurse's salary." She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. The situation was deteriorating faster than she could manage alone. Their conversation shifted to Mr. Davies' daily routine, with Sarah describing the small victories and crushing setbacks that characterized his care. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, he would sit at his old piano and his fingers would find their way to familiar melodies. But these moments were becoming increasingly scarce, like the last notes of a symphony fading into silence. The revelation of Mr. Davies' financial situation struck Anthony particularly hard. The man who had once refused payment from struggling students now faced his own economic challenges. His pension barely covered his basic needs, and the house, once a sanctuary of music and learning, was slipping into disrepair. Sarah shared how she had discovered Mr. Davies's condition during a chance visit 3 years ago. She had come to thank him for his influence on her life, only to find him confused and living in increasingly dangerous conditions. Without hesitation, she had stepped in to help, first as a concerned former student, then as his primary caregiver. "There are others," Sarah mentioned, her eyes brightening slightly. "Former students who stop by when they can. Mark Evans comes by to fix what he can around the house, though there's only so much one person can do." The mention of Mark, another student whose life had been transformed by Mr. Davies's guidance, sparked something in Anthony's mind. The conversation turned to the immediate needs facing their former teacher. The house required substantial repairs before winter, and Mr. Davies needed more comprehensive care than Sarah could provide alone. But beyond the practical concerns lay a deeper question. How had they all allowed their mentor to fade into obscurity? As they talked, the sound of Mr. Davies playing fragments of a familiar piece drifted through the open window. The notes were hesitant, uncertain, like a child learning their first scale. Yet, even in this broken state, the music carried echoes of the masterful teacher who had once sat at that same piano, guiding countless students toward their dreams. Sarah's dedication to Mr. Davies' care spoke volumes about the impact he had on his students' lives. But as she detailed the challenges ahead, it became clear that good intentions alone wouldn't be enough to address the mounting problems. What would it take to restore not just the house, but the dignity of the man who had given so much to others. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows as Anthony made his way through the cluttered living room of his former mentor's home. His footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors, each creak a reminder of the house's age and neglect. In the corner, partially hidden beneath a weathered sheet, stood the unmistakable silhouette of Mr. Davies's grand piano. What memories lay dormant within those ivory keys? Anthony wondered as he approached the instrument that had once been the centerpiece of countless lessons. With gentle reverence, he pulled away the sheet, releasing a cloud of dust that danced in the sunbeams. The piano, though tarnished by time, remained a magnificent Steinway & Sons, the very same one where Anthony had spent countless hours perfecting his technique under Davies' watchful eye. Sarah Jenkins, who had been organizing medications in the kitchen, entered quietly. "He hasn't touched it in over 2 years," she said, her voice carrying a note of sadness. "Sometimes he'll walk past it, as if it's just another piece of furniture." How could something that had once been so central to Davies' identity become invisible to him? Anthony ran his fingers along the keys, pressing one tentatively. The note rang out, slightly out of tune but still carrying its inherent warmth. From the hallway came the shuffle of slippered feet. Mr. Davies had emerged from his afternoon rest, drawn perhaps by the familiar sound. "That's not quite right," Davies mumbled, moving closer to the piano with more purpose than he'd shown all day. "The timing needs to be more precise." For a brief moment, his eyes cleared, focusing on Anthony with a flash of recognition. Could music be the key to reaching through the fog of dementia? Sarah watched intently as Davies approached the piano, his trembling hands hovering over the keys. Without warning, his fingers descended, playing the opening bars of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Though imperfect, the muscle memory remained, flowing through him like a current of electricity bringing life to dormant circuits. Anthony felt his throat tighten as he observed his former teacher lost in the music. How many students had stood in this very spot watching those same hands demonstrate proper technique? The moment proved fleeting. Within minutes, Davies' hands stilled, and confusion crept back into his expression. "I should check the post," Davies announced abruptly, turning away from the piano as if the previous moments had never occurred. Sarah moved to guide him back to his chair, exchanging a meaningful look with Anthony. The brief connection through music had revealed a pathway, however temporary, to the man they both remembered. The discovery sparked an idea in Anthony's mind. If the piano could elicit such a response, what other elements of Davies's musical past might help ground him in the present? He recalled the extensive collection of recordings and sheet music that Davies had maintained throughout his teaching career. Somewhere in this house, those treasures might still exist. As Sarah settled Davies with a cup of tea, Anthony began exploring the adjacent study. Amidst the chaos of scattered papers and forgotten correspondence, he discovered boxes of vinyl records and yellowed musical scores. Each item told a story of Davies' influence on generations of students, including one name that appeared repeatedly on old recital programs: Mark Evans. Anthony remembered Mark as a troubled teenager who had found direction through Davies' guidance. Now a successful contractor, could Mark be the perfect person to help restore both the house and its owner's dignity? The possibility of bringing together more of Davies' former students began to take shape in Anthony's mind. The piano's presence had opened more than just musical memories. It had revealed a potential path forward. But as Anthony continued his careful exploration of the study, another discovery awaited: a collection of unopened letters, all bearing the return address of Olivia Davies. What stories lay within those unread pages from Davies' estranged daughter? The afternoon light continued to fade, casting longer shadows across the piano keys. In the living room, Davies had dozed off in his chair, the brief moment of musical clarity now past. Yet something had shifted in the house's atmosphere, a reminder that beneath the surface of confusion and decay, the essence of the great teacher remained, waiting to be awakened by the right combination of memory and melody. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sir Anthony Hopkins as he stood in Mr. Davies's deteriorating living room, his hand still resting on the dust-covered piano that had sparked a rare moment of clarity in his mentor's eyes. How could he have allowed things to progress this far? The man who had shaped his future, who had believed in him when no one else did, now lived in a house that was literally crumbling around him. Sarah Jenkins appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and hope. "He's resting now," she said softly, moving to stand beside Anthony. That moment with the piano, I haven't seen him that present in months. The unspoken question hung between them. Could music be the key to reaching through the fog of dementia? Anthony pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Mark Evans' number. The former troubled student had transformed himself into one of the most respected restoration specialists in the area, and if anyone could breathe life back into this old house, it would be him. But as Anthony pressed the call button, he knew the physical restoration was only part of the equation. "Mark, it's Sir Anthony Hopkins. I need your help with something rather important." The conversation flowed naturally, with Mark immediately understanding the significance of the project. Who better to restore Mr. Davies's home than another life he had helped rebuild? Mark's voice carried the same tone of gratitude that Anthony felt, and within minutes they had begun forming a plan. Sarah watched the exchange with growing interest, her mind already racing with possibilities. She had been struggling alone for so long, trying to maintain both the house and Mr. Davies' dignity with limited resources. The prospect of help, of a real solution, brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. But there was another piece to this puzzle that needed addressing, one that made Anthony's stomach clench with uncertainty. Olivia Davies had to be contacted. How would Mr. Davies' daughter react to this intervention? The last time anyone had tried to reach out to her, the response had been swift and decisive. She wanted nothing to do with her father's care. Anthony found himself thinking about the countless hours he had spent in this very room, learning not just about music, but about life itself. Mr. Davies had never given up on any of his students, no matter how challenging they proved to be. Wouldn't it be a betrayal of everything he stood for to not at least try to heal this final, most important relationship? The sound of shuffling feet drew their attention. Mr. Davies had emerged from his bedroom, looking confused, but somehow more settled than before. His eyes drifted to the piano, and for a moment, something flickered in their depths, a ghost of the man who had once filled this room with music and wisdom. Sarah moved to guide him to his favorite chair, and Anthony noticed how she hummed softly, as she did so, a piece they had all learned under Mr. Davies's tutelage. The older man's fingers twitched slightly in response, conducting an invisible orchestra only he could see. "We'll need to work quickly," Anthony said, his voice firm with decision. "Mark can begin the restoration next week, but we'll need to find temporary accommodation for Mr. Davies during the major works." He turned to Sarah, who was still standing protectively near their former teacher. "Would you be willing to continue caring for him in a different location?" The logistics began falling into place like notes in a well-composed symphony. Mark would oversee the restoration, Sarah would maintain the continuity of care, and Anthony would provide the necessary resources. But what about the emotional restoration that needed to take place? Could the physical renewal of the house serve as a bridge to heal old wounds? Anthony pulled out his phone once more, this time searching for a number he had obtained years ago, but never used. Olivia Davies needed to know what was happening, not just about the house, but about her father's condition. Perhaps seeing others rally around her father would help her understand the impact he had had on so many lives, including her own. As he composed the message to Olivia, Anthony glanced at Mr. Davies, who was now humming along with Sarah's gentle melody. Music had always been their common language, their way of expressing what words could not capture. Could it now serve as the foundation for rebuilding what time and circumstance had worn away? The decision to restore the house was simple. The challenge would be restoring the connections that had once made it a home. But as Anthony watched his mentor's fingers continue their phantom conducting, he knew that some melodies were worth fighting for, no matter how complex the arrangement might be. When Anthony Hopkins first approached Mark Evans' workshop on the outskirts of town, The steady rhythm of hammering and the scent of fresh-cut wood brought back memories of his mentor's piano lessons. How many times had Mr. Davies spoken about the similarities between crafting music and crafting with one's hands? The parallel seemed particularly poignant now, as Anthony sought out another of Davies's former students. Mark Evans stood at his workbench, carefully sanding the edge of what appeared to be a custom cabinet door. The years had added gray to his temples, but his hands moved with the same precise confidence that had once coaxed melodies from piano keys. When he looked up and recognized Anthony, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine warmth. "Sir Anthony," Mark said, setting aside his tools. "I'd heard you were back in town. This isn't about a furniture commission, is it?" The carpenter's intuition proved as sharp as his chisels. He had already guessed this visit concerned their shared mentor. Anthony explained his vision for restoring Davies' home, watching as Mark's eyes lit up with understanding. The carpenter had his own stories of how Mr. Davies had helped him channel his teenage anger into creativity, first through music and later through woodworking. "He saw something in me when everyone else had written me off," Mark revealed, running his hand along the grain of a nearby piece of oak. The conversation shifted to practical matters, with Mark offering insights that only someone intimately familiar with both construction and Mr. Davies could provide. He spoke of preserving the house's character while making it safer and more accessible for their aging mentor. His suggestions revealed not just professional expertise, but a deep appreciation for the space where so many students had found their path. Sarah Jenkins joined their planning sessions, bringing her daily observations of Mr. Davies' needs and routines. The three former students formed an unlikely but effective team, each contributing their unique perspective to the project. Mark's practical knowledge complemented Sarah's caregiving insights, while Anthony's resources could make their shared vision possible. The renovation plans grew beyond mere repairs. Mark proposed modifications that would allow Mr. Davies to continue enjoying his beloved piano room, despite his increasing mobility challenges. He designed subtle handrails that would blend with the existing woodwork and suggested ways to improve lighting without disrupting the home's historic charm. Word of the project spread through the network of Davies' former students. Some offered their services, while others shared memories that helped Mark better understand the house's significance to the community. How many lives had been shaped within those walls? The question seemed to hover in the air during every planning. Meeting Mark's involvement brought more than technical expertise to the project. His presence represented another thread in the tapestry of lives Mr. Davies had influenced. Like Anthony and Sarah, he carried forward their mentor's legacy of patience, precision, and belief in human potential. The renovation would be more than a construction project. It would be a tribute to these enduring lessons. The carpenter's commitment to the project ran deeper than professional pride. During one planning session, he revealed how Mr. Davies had attended his first furniture exhibition years after their piano lessons had ended. "He still believed in me," Mark said, quietly, "even when I'd stopped believing in myself." This understanding of their mentor's impact made him particularly careful in planning changes to the house where so many similar transformations had occurred. As the renovation plans took shape, Anthony observed how Mark's approach to the project mirrored Mr. Davies' teaching style, methodical, attentive to detail, yet always focused on the human element. The carpenter insisted on solutions that would preserve their mentor's dignity while ensuring his safety and comfort. Would Mr. Davies recognize the care and respect being poured into every decision? The team's dynamics evolved as they worked together. Sarah's daily reports helped Mark fine-tune his plans, while Anthony's resources enabled solutions that might otherwise have been out of reach. Their shared connection to Mr. Davies created a foundation of trust and understanding that made collaboration natural and effective. Yet even as they moved forward with their plans, questions lingered about Olivia's absence. Mark remembered her from their youth, another student in her father's house of music. Would the restoration of the physical space create an opening for emotional repairs as well? The possibility added another layer of purpose to their undertaking. The project was taking shape, but they all understood that the real challenge lay ahead. How would they manage the renovation while minimizing disruption to Mr. Davies's routine? The question led to lengthy discussions about timing, staging, and ways to protect their mentor's sense of security during the changes to come. News of Mr. Davies' situation rippled through the small Welsh town like music carried on a gentle breeze. Former students, neighbors, and townspeople who had been touched by the old piano teacher's kindness over the decades began reaching out to Sir Anthony Hopkins with offers of help. What had started as a simple renovation project was transforming into something far more meaningful, a testament to how one person's influence could echo through generations. Sarah Jenkins noticed the change first as more familiar faces began appearing at the house. It's remarkable how many lives he touched, she mentioned to Anthony one morning as they watched 3 local craftsmen, all former students of Mr. Davies, carefully removing damaged wallpaper from the sitting room. Each person who comes through the door has a story about how he helped them. Mark Evans found himself coordinating an ever-growing team of volunteers. Local businesses began donating materials, while others offered their services at reduced rates. The hardware store owner, whose daughter had taken lessons from Mr. Davies 20 years prior, provided paint and supplies at cost. Even the local cafe started sending over hot meals for the workers, their way of contributing to the effort. But it was the stories that truly revealed the depth of Mr. Davies's impact. As people worked, they shared memories of their time with the old piano teacher. One electrician recalled how Mr. Davies had paid for his lessons secretly when his family fell on hard times. A painter spoke of how the teacher had helped him overcome his stuttering through music. Each tale added another layer to the portrait of a man who had given so much of himself to others. The renovation project became a focal point for the community's collective gratitude. Yet amidst all this activity, Mr. Davies himself remained in his own world, occasionally pausing by a window to watch the workers with confused interest. During these moments, Sarah would gently explain what was happening, though it wasn't clear how much he understood. Sometimes he would smile and nod, other times he would simply return to humming fragments of old compositions. Anthony observed all this with mixed emotions. While heartened by the outpouring of support, he couldn't help but think of Olivia's continued absence. How many of these stories would she never know? How much of her father's legacy remained hidden from her? He had made several attempts to contact her, each met with polite but firm resistance. What would it take to bridge this gap between father and daughter? The project took on an almost rhythmic quality, with different groups arriving each day to contribute their part to the whole. Mark coordinated their efforts like a conductor, ensuring each element harmonized with the others. The house, which had fallen into such disrepair, began to show signs of its former glory. Fresh paint brightened walls that had grown dim with age. New wiring brought light to corners long left in shadow. The garden, too, began to transform as local gardeners volunteered their time to restore its former beauty. But perhaps the most touching moment came when the local music shop owner arrived with a team to restore Mr. Davies' old piano. They worked with reverent care, treating each component as if it were precious gold. The instrument had been silent for years, its keys yellow and stuck, its strings rusted and out of tune. Would its voice, like its owner's memories, ever return to its former clarity? As the community rallied around the project, questions began to surface about what would happen once the renovation was complete. Who would ensure Mr. Davies' continued care? How could they preserve not just the house, but the legacy of the man who had touched so many lives? And most importantly, could this outpouring of community support somehow help heal the rift between father and daughter? The answers to these questions remained elusive, but the work continued. Each nail hammered, each wall painted, each floorboard replaced became a note in a larger composition, a symphony of gratitude played by an entire community. But would this melody ever reach the ears of the one person who needed to hear it most? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the newly restored windows of Mr. Davies' living room, where the old Steinway grand piano stood as a silent sentinel of bygone days. Sir Anthony Hopkins settled onto the familiar bench, his fingers hovering over the ivory keys that had guided countless students, including himself, through the intricacies of classical music. What melodies still lived in the chambers of Mr. Davies's mind? Which notes might unlock the doors that dementia had sealed shut? Anthony began with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece Mr. Davies had assigned him nearly 4 decades ago. The gentle notes floated through the house, drawing Sarah Jenkins from her tasks in the kitchen and causing Mr. Davies to lift his head from his armchair. That opening phrase, Mr. Davies mumbled, his clouded eyes showing a glimmer of recognition. The left hand must float like leaves on water. These were the exact words he had used in Anthony's lessons years ago. Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with Anthony, who continued playing while carefully observing his former teacher's reactions. As the piece progressed, Mr. Davies began to conduct with his right hand, his movements becoming more precise with each bar. "Miss Jenkins," he called out, suddenly using Sarah's formal name as he had during her lessons. "Notice how the melody weaves through the accompaniment. It's a conversation, not a monologue." Anthony transitioned seamlessly into Bach's Prelude, in C major, remembering how Mr. Davies had insisted on technical precision while teaching this piece to Mark Evans during his troubled youth. The mathematical certainty of Bach's progressions seemed to ground Mr. Davies, who began nodding in time with the music. "Mark struggled with this one," Mr. Davies said clearly, surprising both Anthony and Sarah with his sudden lucidity. Too much anger in his hands. Music needs space to breathe. The observation was so characteristic of the old teacher that Anthony felt his throat tighten with emotion. Sarah moved closer to Mr. Davies's chair, noticing how his fingers were now moving, in perfect synchronization with Anthony's playing. How many times had those same fingers demonstrated these pieces to students? How many lives had been shaped by the wisdom they conveyed? The music shifted to Beethoven's Für Elise, a piece that held particular significance. It was the last piece. Mr. Davies had taught Olivia before their relationship fractured. Anthony had chosen it deliberately, wondering if its familiar patterns might spark memories of his daughter. Mr. Davies's reaction was immediate and profound. His hands stilled, and his eyes focused on some distant point. "She always rushed the middle section," he whispered. "So eager to reach the end, my Olivia." The pain in his voice was raw and present, transcending the fog of his condition. Sarah quietly retrieved an old photograph from the side table, Olivia at her first recital, her father beaming beside her, at this same piano. Mr. Davies reached for it with trembling hands, his fingers tracing the outline of his daughter's face. Would Olivia understand the power of these moments if she were here? Could these musical memories help bridge the years of silence? Anthony continued playing, weaving together fragments of pieces that had defined their shared musical journey. Each melody seemed to unlock another compartment in Mr. Davies' memory, bringing forth snippets of lessons, performances, and quiet moments of musical discovery. The afternoon light was fading when Mark Evans arrived to check on the recent renovations. He paused in the doorway, recognizing the piece that had once helped him channel his adolescent turmoil into something beautiful. How many others stood in similar doorways over the years, their lives transformed by the man who now struggled to remember their names. As the final notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune dissolved into silence, Mr. Davies turned to Anthony with unusual clarity. "Music never truly leaves us, does it?" he asked. "It lives in our fingers, in our hearts, even when the mind wanders." His words captured the essence of what they were all discovering, that while memories might fade, the emotional connections forged through music remained mysteriously intact. What other memories lay dormant, waiting for the right combination of notes to awaken them? Could these musical sessions become a bridge not only to Mr. Davies' past, but also to a possible reconciliation with Olivia? Anthony shared a knowing look with Sarah, both understanding that they had stumbled upon a powerful key to reaching their beloved teacher's inner world. During a quiet afternoon at Davies's home as autumn leaves scattered across the freshly painted porch, Sarah Jenkins found herself sharing tea with Sir Anthony Hopkins in the kitchen. The renovation work had transformed much of the house, but this room retained its lived-in comfort, with its worn wooden table and familiar tea-stained mugs that had survived countless conversations. "There's something you need to know about Olivia," Sarah began, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. It wasn't just a simple falling out between father and daughter. The weight of untold history hung in her words, drawing Anthony's full attention. Sarah revealed how Olivia had once been her father's most promising student, possessing both his talent and his passion for music. But unlike the other students who flourished under Davies's demanding teaching style, Olivia struggled with the pressures of being both daughter and pupil. "He pushed her harder than any of us," Sarah explained, perhaps too hard, thinking he was doing what was best for her future. The breaking point came during Olivia's final year at the conservatory. Davies had arranged for her to perform at a prestigious competition, one that could have launched her career. But the night before the performance, Olivia made a decision that would alter both their lives. She walked away from music entirely. She left a note saying she couldn't live under the shadow of his expectations anymore. Sarah continued, her voice softening with the memory. Anthony listened intently, understanding now why Davies occasionally called out Olivia's name during his more lucid moments. "How long has it been since they've spoken?" he asked, already forming plans in his mind. "Almost 15 years, Sarah replied. "She married, moved to Bristol, and as far as I know, hasn't touched a piano since. I've kept track of her through mutual friends, but she's made it clear she wants nothing to do with her father's world." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conversation shifted to Olivia's current life, where Sarah revealed she worked as an art therapist, helping children process trauma through creative expression. Perhaps she found her own way to heal through art, even if it wasn't through music, Sarah mused. Anthony recognized the delicate nature of the situation. The Davies he knew, the mentor who had guided so many students with wisdom and patience, seemed at odds with the father who had inadvertently driven his daughter away. Yet, with Davies's condition deteriorating, time was becoming precious. "Does she know about his dementia?" Anthony inquired, watching Sarah's expression carefully. The caretaker shook her head, explaining that all attempts to contact Olivia had been met with silence. Even Mark Evans, who had known her during their student days, had tried reaching out without success. The revelation sparked something in Anthony, a determination to bridge this painful gap before it was too late. He understood the complexity of father-daughter relationships, the way expectations and love could become tangled until they formed knots too tight to untie. But he also knew that Davies' current state offered a unique opportunity for reconciliation. "What if we approached her differently?" Anthony suggested, sharing his thoughts about how Davies' condition might change the dynamic. "She's working with troubled children, helping them heal through art. Perhaps she needs to know that her father, in his vulnerability, needs that same kind of healing." Sarah considered this perspective, remembering how Davies had responded to music therapy in recent weeks. The piano melodies that Anthony played had reached parts of Davies' memory that seemed otherwise lost, creating moments of clarity in the fog of his condition. The conversation turned to practical matters: how to contact Olivia, what message might resonate with her, and how to handle Davies' potential reaction if she did return. They discussed the delicate balance between hope and realism, knowing that years of estrangement couldn't be erased overnight. As they planned, the sound of Davies shuffling in the next room reminded them of the urgency of their mission. His voice carried through the wall, humming a melody, the same piece Olivia had been practicing the day she left. Did he remember? Was he calling out to her in his own way? The question hung between Anthony and Sarah. Could they help father and daughter find their way back to each other before time ran out? The renovation of Davies's house had brought physical renewal, but perhaps the true restoration needed was of the heart. The first signs of construction arrived with the morning sun, a parade of trucks and equipment rolling up the narrow lane to Mr. Davies' Victorian home. Mark Evans stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing workers with the precision of an orchestra conductor. Who would have thought the troubled teenager who once slouched at Mr. Davies's piano would now command such authority? Sir Anthony Hopkins watched from his car, observing the careful choreography of workers moving in and out of the house. The renovation project represented more than just repairs to a deteriorating structure. It embodied hope for healing deeper wounds. How many lives had been shaped within these walls under Mr. Davies's patient guidance? Inside, Sarah Jenkins gently led Mr. Davies to the sunroom away from the commotion. The familiar space had become their sanctuary during these transitions, though today even this retreat couldn't fully shield them from the echoing sounds of work beginning upstairs. Mr. Davies' fingers twitched against the armrest, conducting an invisible symphony to a rhythm only he could hear. "What's all that racket about?" Mr. Davies asked, his Welsh lilt carrying a note of anxiety. "Are they coming to take my piano?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "No, Mr. Davies. Remember how Sir Anthony talked about making the house better? That's all this is, just some improvements to keep you comfortable." The mention of Anthony's name sparked a moment of clarity in Mr. Davies's eyes. Anthony? Yes, he was always such a dedicated student. Never missed a lesson, that one. His voice trailed off as he became lost in memories of countless hours spent teaching at the piano. Mark made his way to the sunroom, careful to remove his work boots before entering. The respect he showed for his former teacher's space revealed the lasting impact of lessons learned years ago. Could the troubled young man who once kicked those same walls in frustration imagine he'd return to restore them? "Everything's progressing well, Sarah," Mark reported quietly. "We're starting with the roof and working our way down. Should have the worst of the noise done within a week." Sarah nodded, watching Mr. Davies as he hummed softly to himself. "He's been asking about his piano. Could we perhaps move it to this room temporarily? Having it nearby might help ease his anxiety about the changes." The renovation team worked with careful consideration, understanding that this project required more than just technical skill. It demanded sensitivity to the delicate balance of Mr. Davies' world. Each worker had been briefed on the importance of maintaining routines and minimizing disruptions to the elderly musician's daily life. Sir Anthony made regular visits throughout the week, often bringing old photographs and sheet music to share with his former teacher. These moments of connection seemed to ground Mr. Davies even as his home transformed around him. During one such visit, Anthony noticed a small photograph that had slipped from one of the albums. A young Olivia Davies sitting at the piano, her father beaming proudly beside her. The image sparked a renewed sense of purpose in Anthony's mission to reunite father and daughter. What memories did Olivia hold of this house in its prime? Would the restoration of her childhood home help bridge the gap between past and present? As the first week of renovation drew to a close, the workers had settled into a rhythm that seemed to complement rather than disturb the house's musical history. The careful removal of old wallpaper revealed layers of the past, faded sheet music that had been used to patch holes, pencil marks tracking children's heights, and even old program notes from student recitals. Mark took particular care in preserving these discoveries, understanding their significance beyond mere construction debris. Each fragment told a story of the lives touched by Mr. Davies' teaching, of music that had filled these rooms for decades. What other memories lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? The project attracted attention from the local community, with former students occasionally stopping by to check on their beloved teacher. Their presence seemed to spark moments of recognition in Mr. Davies, though these moments remained as fleeting as notes in a passing melody. Sarah maintained her steadfast care throughout the chaos, adapting their routines to accommodate the construction, while ensuring Mr. Davies remained connected to his music. She had begun playing recordings of his favorite pieces during the noisiest periods of work, creating a familiar soundtrack to counterbalance the unfamiliar sounds of renovation. As dusk settled on another day of work, Sir Anthony stood in the garden watching the sunset paint the old house in warm hues. The project was more than a renovation. It was an orchestration of hope, a careful composition of past and present. Would these efforts create the harmony needed to bring Olivia home? Only time would reveal the full score of their endeavor. As dust settled from the morning's renovation work, Mark Evans sat with Sir Anthony Hopkins in what remained of Mr. Davies' living room, their conversation drifting to darker days when Mark first encountered the old piano teacher. Who could have predicted that a rebellious teenager's mandatory music lessons would alter the course of his life? I was 16 when the school counselor suggested music therapy, Mark revealed, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea Sarah had prepared. My parents had split up and I was failing every subject. The last thing I wanted was to learn piano from some old man in a rundown house. Sir Anthony listened intently, recognizing the familiar pattern of how Gareth Davies had touched so many lives. How many others like Mark had walked through that door carrying invisible burdens? The construction sounds from upstairs provided a fitting backdrop to Mark's tale of reconstruction, both of the house and his younger self. That first lesson, I refused to even touch the keys. Mark continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Davies simply sat there patient as ever and started telling me about Beethoven's struggle with deafness. How did he know that would catch my attention? That I'd been gradually losing hearing in my right ear. The revelation hung in the air between them, punctuated by the rhythmic hammering from above. Sarah, who had been quietly organizing medical supplies nearby, paused to listen. She'd never heard this part of Mark's story despite working alongside him these past weeks. He didn't teach me scales or theory that first day. Instead, he showed me how music could express what words couldn't. When my fingers finally touched those keys, something broke loose inside. Mark's voice carried the weight of transformation. He never once mentioned my grades or my attitude. He just kept teaching, kept believing. Sir Anthony nodded, remembering his own experiences with the man who now dozed in the next room, lost in the fog of dementia. What was it about Gareth Davies that allowed him to see past the surface, to reach the potential hiding beneath years of hurt and anger? By the end of that year, I wasn't just passing, I was excelling, Mark said. Mr. Davies had shown me how to channel everything I was feeling into music. My grades improved because I finally had a reason to care. I learned discipline through practice, found peace in the structure of sonatas. Sarah moved closer, drawn into the narrative. Did you continue with music after school? Not professionally, Mark replied, gesturing to his work clothes. But it gave me something more valuable, a foundation. Every project I take on, I approach it with the same patience and attention to detail Mr. Davies taught me through music. When Sir Anthony called about renovating this house, how could I say no? The conversation shifted to the current renovation plans, but the impact of Mark's story lingered. How many other lives had been quietly transformed within these walls? What melodies of healing had echoed through this house over the decades? From the next room came the soft sound of Mr. Davies humming, a fragment of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Did some part of him remember the countless lives he'd touched? Did he know that his legacy lived on in the success stories of students like Mark? The renovation would restore the physical structure, but the true restoration had begun years ago, one student at a time. As Sir Anthony watched Mark review the building plans, he wondered about Olivia. Would her father's story of redemption through Mark help her understand the man who had saved so many others while struggling to connect with his own daughter? The hammering continued overhead, each strike another step toward renewal. In the midst of chaos and construction, the house seemed to hold its secrets close, waiting for the right moment to reveal how many lives had been rebuilt within its walls, just as its own restoration was now underway. The search for Olivia Davies began with a single photograph, faded and worn, tucked away in Mr. Davies's piano bench. Sir Anthony Hopkins studied the image of a young woman with her father, both smiling at a piano recital from 15 years ago. What had caused such a deep rift between father and daughter that Olivia hadn't visited since her father's decline into dementia? Through careful inquiries and his extensive connections in the music world, Anthony discovered Olivia working as a music teacher at a prestigious conservatory in Edinburgh. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had followed in her father's footsteps despite their estrangement. When he called the school's administration office, the receptionist informed him that Ms. Davies rarely took unexpected calls, especially from strangers. Undeterred, Anthony penned a heartfelt letter explaining his connection to her father and the current situation. He detailed Mr. Davies' condition, the ongoing renovation of the house, and most importantly, the impact her father had made on countless students' lives, including his own. Would she be willing to meet, if only to discuss her father's care? 3. Weeks passed without response. Sarah Jenkins continued her daily visits to Mr. Davies, noting how he would sometimes call out Olivia's name during his more lucid moments. During one such instance, he had shuffled to the piano, playing a simple melody he'd apparently composed for Olivia's 5th birthday. The moment struck Anthony deeply. How many memories remained locked away in Mr. Davies's mind, waiting to be shared with his daughter? Just as Anthony considered making the journey to Edinburgh himself, an email arrived from Olivia. The message was brief but revealing. Why now, after all these years? What's left to say when he probably won't even know who I am? Anthony crafted his response carefully, sharing Mark Evans' recent story of redemption and the community's rallying support for the house renovation. He explained how her father, even in his confused state, had never stopped being a teacher, how he would still correct Sarah's piano posture or hum along to scales practiced by visiting students. Would Olivia consider allowing Anthony to visit her in Edinburgh to talk in person? The reply came faster this time. Olivia agreed to meet, but her terms were clear. She would come to her father's house, but only after hours, when she could see the changes without having to encounter him. She needed to process this at her own pace. On a cool evening the following week, Anthony waited outside the partially renovated house. Mark had ensured the front garden was cleared and planted with fresh flowers, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the care being invested in the project. When Olivia's car pulled up, Anthony recognized her immediately. She had her father's eyes. The tour of the house proved emotional for Olivia. Each room held memories. The kitchen where she'd done her homework, the living room where she'd practiced, piano for hours, the small study where her father had taught countless students. She paused longest in the music room, running her fingers along the piano's keys without pressing them. He was always more comfortable teaching other people's children than raising his own, Olivia finally said, breaking the heavy silence. After Mom died, it was like I became just another student. Everything had to be perfect, every note, every performance. When I finally told him I wanted to study composition instead of performance, he couldn't understand. Said I was wasting my talent. Anthony listened as Olivia's story unfolded. The mounting pressure, the arguments, the final explosive confrontation that led to her departure. But wasn't there more to this story? What about the father who had composed birthday melodies, who had kept every program from every recital she'd ever performed? As they talked into the night, Anthony shared his own experiences with Mr. Davies, not as the perfect teacher, but as a human being who had shaped lives through both his strengths and flaws. He described how her father now struggled to remember names but could still play entire sonatas from memory, how he kept asking for "my Olivia" during his clearer moments. The question hung unspoken between them. Would Olivia be willing to see her father, to bridge the gap before time ran out? The renovation of the house had become more than just a physical restoration. It was an opportunity to rebuild something far more precious. But would Olivia take that chance? The crisp autumn wind carried fallen leaves across the empty parking lot as Sir Anthony Hopkins sat in his car, staring at the crumpled piece of paper bearing Olivia Davies' address. After weeks of searching, he had finally located Mr. Davies' daughter in a small town just outside of Manchester. But would she be willing to listen? The years of silence between father and daughter had created a chasm that seemed almost impossible to bridge. When Anthony knocked on the door of the modest flat, he found himself face to face with a woman whose features eerily mirrored those of his former mentor. Olivia's initial shock at seeing the renowned musician on her doorstep quickly transformed into guarded suspicion. The invitation to come inside felt more like a reluctant concession than genuine welcome. "I suppose you're here about Dad," Olivia said, her voice tight with emotion as she prepared tea neither of them would drink. "How did you find me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and years of carefully constructed distance. Anthony explained his connection to her father, watching as Olivia's shoulders tensed with each mention of the man who had shaped both their lives in such different ways. As Anthony shared updates about Mr. Davies' condition and the ongoing renovation efforts, Olivia's responses grew increasingly defensive. "You don't understand what it was like," she interrupted, her hands clenching around her untouched teacup. "Growing up, it was always about the music, always about his students. Do you know how many family dinners were interrupted because someone needed an emergency lesson? How many of my school performances he missed because of recitals?" The bitterness in her voice revealed wounds that had festered far too long. Anthony listened as years of suppressed hurt poured out. Stories of a childhood spent competing with a parade of students for her father's attention, of a teenager who eventually stopped trying to bridge the gap, of a young woman who finally walked away when her mother's death left her feeling more alone than ever in her own home. "He's different now," Anthony ventured carefully, but Olivia's bitter laugh cut through his words. "Of course he is. He has dementia. Is that supposed to make everything better?" Her eyes shone with unshed tears as she stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. "I can't just pretend the past didn't happen because he's ill. It's not that simple." Anthony recognized the complex mix of love, guilt, and resentment in Olivia's voice, emotions he had seen reflected in Mr. Davies's eyes during rare moments of clarity when he spoke of his daughter. How could he help them both see past the pain to what remained possible? The challenge seemed as daunting as teaching a difficult piece of music, requiring patience, persistence, and faith in the underlying harmony waiting to be revealed. "Your father asked about you last week," Anthony said quietly, watching Olivia freeze mid-stride. It was one of his lucid moments. He was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. "Your mother's favorite piece," he said. Then he looked at me and asked if you still played. The memory of that moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Olivia's hands trembled as she sank back into her chair. "I haven't touched a piano in years," she whispered, but her fingers moved unconsciously, tracing phantom keys on the arm of her chair. "After Mum died, it just hurt too much." The admission seemed to cost her, each word drawn out reluctantly from some deep protected place. "Perhaps that's exactly why you should come," Anthony suggested gently. "Not for the past, but for what's possible now. Sarah, his caretaker, she says music still reaches him when nothing else can. And no one knows his favorite pieces better than you do." He watched hope and fear war across Olivia's face, wondering which would win out. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of decisions yet unmade. Would Olivia find the courage to face her father again? Could music, which had once driven them apart, now serve as a bridge back to each other? The questions lingered unanswered as Anthony prepared to leave, knowing he had done all he could for now. Sometimes the hardest compositions required time to master, and healing old wounds was perhaps the most challenging symphony of all. The gentle tapping of hammers and whir of power tools filled the old Victorian house as Mark Evans directed his renovation crew through their daily tasks. The transformation over the past weeks had been remarkable, breathing new life into the tired structure that had sheltered so many aspiring musicians over the decades. But today would prove more extraordinary than anyone anticipated. Sir Anthony Hopkins stood in what was once the music room, his fingers trailing over the freshly painted walls where countless photographs of students had once hung. Sarah Jenkins appeared in the doorway, her expression animated with an urgency that immediately caught his attention. "Sir Anthony, you need to come quickly. It's Mr. Davies. Something's different today." What followed was a moment that would remain etched in their memories forever. As they entered the sunroom, where Mr. Davies spent most of his mornings, the elderly man looked up from his chair with unusual clarity in his eyes. "Anthony?" he asked, his voice carrying a recognition that had been absent for months. "Anthony Hopkins, is that really you?" The weight of that simple question hung in the air. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes, while Anthony moved forward slowly, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. How many times had he visited only to be met with confused stares or vacant smiles. "Yes, Mr. Davies, it's me," Anthony replied, kneeling beside his former teacher's chair. "I've been here quite often lately. Do you remember the renovations we're doing to your house?" Mr. Davies' eyes darted around the room, taking in the fresh paint and new fixtures with apparent comprehension. "The house? Yes, I hear them working. But why are you here, Anthony? Surely you have more important things to do than fuss over an old man's home." The question struck at the heart of everything Anthony had been trying to accomplish. How could he explain the debt of gratitude he felt? The way Mr. Davies' guidance had shaped not just his musical career, but his entire life. Before he could formulate a response, Mark appeared in the doorway, tools still in hand, frozen in place by the scene before him. Mr. Davies' gaze shifted to the contractor, and another spark of recognition flickered. "Mark Evans. You were always rushing through your scales, weren't you? Never wanted to do the foundational work." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, and Mark's tools clattered to the floor. Sarah quickly retrieved her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. Who should know about this moment? How long would this clarity last? The questions raced through her mind as she stepped into the hallway, her voice low but urgent as she left a message for Olivia. Would this be the breakthrough they needed to bring father and daughter together again? Back in the sunroom, Mr. Davies continued to speak, his words flowing with a coherence that had been absent for so long. He asked about specific pieces of music he had taught Anthony, referenced particular lessons from decades past, and even hummed a few bars of Bach's Prelude in C major, the first piece he had assigned to both Anthony and Mark. The moment felt both eternal and fleeting, like trying to hold on to the final notes of a perfect performance. Anthony found himself studying his mentor's face, committing every detail to memory. The sharp intelligence in those eyes might cloud over again at any moment, but for now, they held the same wisdom and warmth that had guided so many students through their musical journeys. Mark had moved closer, setting aside his contractor's role to become once again the student who had found direction through Mr. Davies' patience and persistence. "Sir, the music room, we're restoring it exactly as it was. The acoustic panels, the position of the piano, everything." Mr. Davies nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Music needs the right space to breathe, to come alive. You remember that lesson, don't you, Anthony? About how the room shapes the sound?" The conversation continued, weaving between past and present, while Sarah remained in the hallway, leaving message after message for Olivia. How could she convey the importance of this moment? What words could capture the transformation they were witnessing? As the morning light shifted through the windows, they all felt the weight of time pressing upon them. How long would this clarity last? What questions should they ask while they had the chance? The renovation crews worked on, unaware of the extraordinary scene unfolding in the sunroom, where 3 former students sat with their teacher, suspended in a precious moment of recognition and remembrance. But even as they savored this unexpected gift, another question lingered unspoken between them. Would Olivia arrive in time to share in this moment of clarity with her father? And if she did, what words would pass between father and daughter after so many years of silence? While sorting through boxes in Mr. Davies' study during the renovation, Sarah Jenkins discovered a weathered leather case tucked behind decades of accumulated papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the brass latches, revealing hundreds of meticulously organized sheet music and teaching notes spanning over 40 years of Mr. Davies' career. "Sir Anthony, you need to see this," Sarah called out, her voice carrying a mix of reverence and excitement. As Anthony made his way across the dust-covered room, Sarah began laying out yellowed pages covered in Mr. Davies' distinctive handwriting, detailed observations about each student's progress, personalized exercises, and thoughtfully crafted teaching strategies. Anthony picked up one of the sheets, immediately recognizing his own name at the top of a page dated 1975. The margins contained Mr. Davies' precise notations about his early struggles with Chopin's nocturnes and specific finger placement suggestions. "He kept everything," Anthony murmured, his fingers tracing the faded ink. "Every student, every lesson." Mark Evans joined them, drawn by their discovery. His eyes widened as he found his own records from the turbulent teenage years when Mr. Davies had taken him under his wing. The pages told a story of patience and persistence, with encouraging notes about small improvements and breakthrough moments. "I had no idea he documented everything so carefully," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. As they continued exploring the archive, patterns emerged in Mr. Davies's teaching philosophy. Each student's file revealed his remarkable ability to identify not just technical challenges, but emotional barriers that held them back. His notes showed how he adapted his approach for different personalities, creating individual paths toward musical excellence. Sarah uncovered a section dedicated to Olivia's childhood lessons. The pages chronicled her natural talent and her father's careful nurturing of her abilities, but they also revealed his struggle to balance being both teacher and parent. The last entry in Olivia's file contained a single line: "Music should unite, not divide." The discovery prompted Anthony to reach for his phone, scrolling to Olivia's number. Their previous conversations had been brief and guarded, but perhaps these documents could bridge the gap. Would sharing this tangible evidence of her father's dedication help heal old wounds? How many other lives had been shaped by the careful guidance documented in these pages? Among the teaching records, they found programs from student recitals spanning 4 decades. Names of now successful musicians jumped out from the yellowed papers, some who had gone on to prestigious conservatories, others who had become teachers themselves, carrying forward Mr. Davies's methods and philosophy. Mark began organizing the materials chronologically, creating a timeline of Mr. Davies's influence on the local music community. "Look at this," he said, pointing to recurring names across different years. "These are generations of families who sent their children to him. He created a musical legacy that spans generations." The documents revealed another layer of Mr. Davies's impact: letters from parents thanking him for his patience, notes from former students sharing their successes, and newspaper clippings celebrating his students' achievements. Each piece added depth to their understanding of the man who now sat in his armchair, often lost in the fog of dementia. Sarah found herself wondering about the countless hours represented in these pages: the dedication, the persistence, the belief in each student's potential. How many lives had been redirected through his careful guidance? What unseen ripples had spread out from this very room where they now stood? Anthony carefully gathered several meaningful pieces, including Olivia's records and some particularly touching thank you letters. These weren't just teaching notes, they were testament to a life dedicated to nurturing talent and building confidence in others. Perhaps they could help Olivia understand the depth of her father's commitment, not just to music, but to every student who walked through his door. The afternoon light was fading as they continued their exploration, casting long shadows across the piles of memories spread before them. Each page they uncovered added another thread to the tapestry of Mr. Davies's influence, revealing how one person's dedication to teaching could create waves of positive change through generations. What other treasures lay waiting in the remaining boxes? And how might these discoveries help heal the rifts that time and misunderstanding had created? When word spread through the local music community about Mr. Davies's situation, the response proved more overwhelming than Sir Anthony Hopkins could have imagined. Former students, many now accomplished musicians themselves, began reaching out with offers of support. What started as a trickle soon transformed into a steady stream of helping hands, each carrying their own cherished memories of the man who had shaped their musical journeys. Sarah Jenkins found herself fielding countless calls and messages, each one revealing another thread in the tapestry of Mr. Davies' influence. "It's remarkable," she shared with Anthony during one of their regular check-ins. "These aren't just former students. They're people whose entire lives were redirected because of him." She proceeded to read from a particularly touching email from a violinist who now played with the London Symphony Orchestra, crediting Mr. Davies for believing in her when no one else would. Mark Evans, coordinating the renovation efforts, discovered that many volunteers brought more than just their labor. They arrived with stories, old photographs, and even recordings of their performances under Mr. Davies's tutelage. During lunch breaks, The renovation site transformed into an impromptu gathering of musicians sharing their experiences. One elderly gentleman brought his original sheet music from 30 years ago, complete with Mr. Davies' distinctive red ink annotations. The impact of these reunions became evident in subtle ways. When former students would visit, Mr. Davies's eyes would sometimes spark with recognition, even if he couldn't quite place the faces. The music they played seemed to reach him on a level that words could not. During one particularly moving afternoon, a former student performed Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece Mr. Davies had taught countless times, and those present watched as his fingers moved slightly, conducting along with the familiar melody. Sir Anthony observed these interactions with a mixture of joy and melancholy. How many lives had been touched by this one man? And how many of these students, like Olivia, had stories left unresolved? He decided to document these visits, collecting testimonials and memories that might help Olivia understand the broader impact of her father's legacy. The community support extended beyond just the musical realm. Local businesses began contributing to the renovation efforts. The hardware store offered materials at cost, while the local cafe provided meals for the volunteers. Even the town's historical society became involved, recognizing the importance of preserving what had essentially been an unofficial conservatory for decades. Sarah noticed that these gatherings had another unexpected effect. They seemed to provide Mr. Davies with a sense of routine and purpose. On days when former students were scheduled to visit, he appeared more alert and engaged. She began incorporating music more deliberately into his daily care routine, playing recordings of his former students' performances, and noting how certain pieces would trigger memories or emotional responses. Mark, meanwhile, found himself becoming an unofficial curator of sorts. As the renovation progressed, he created a dedicated space in the house where memorabilia could be displayed. Photos, programs from student recitals, and cherished sheet music began filling the walls, creating a visual timeline of Mr. Davies's teaching career. But would these collected memories be enough to bridge the gap between father and daughter? The growing support network raised important questions about the future. What would happen to this community once the renovation was complete? How could they ensure that Mr. Davies' legacy would continue to inspire future generations of musicians? And perhaps most importantly, how would Olivia react to discovering this extended family she never knew she had? As Sir Anthony watched the project unfold, he realized that they were doing more than just restoring a house. They were piecing together a life's work, note by note, memory by memory. The challenge now lay in helping Olivia understand that she was not just the daughter of a piano teacher, but part of a larger symphony of lives her father had touched and transformed. The community's response had created something beautiful and unexpected, a living testament to Mr. Davies's impact. But would it be enough to help him find his way back to himself? And would it finally bring his daughter home? These questions lingered in the air like the final notes of an unfinished piece, waiting for resolution. The late autumn rain tapped against the cafe window as Sir Anthony Hopkins studied Olivia Davies' face across the small table, searching for traces of her father in her features. The resemblance was there, the same determined set of the jaw, the thoughtful eyes that seemed to look beyond the surface of things. But where Gareth Davies had always radiated warmth, his daughter's expression remained carefully guarded. "Why now?" Olivia asked, wrapping her hands around her untouched coffee cup. "After all these years, why are you reaching out about my father, now?" Anthony considered how to bridge the gulf of years and hurt that separated this woman from the man who had shaped so many lives, including his own. How could he explain that the Mr. Davies who had once filled concert halls with sublime piano compositions was now struggling to remember his own name? "Your father needs you, Olivia, more than he ever has before," Anthony began carefully. "The dementia is progressing, and while Sarah provides excellent care, there are moments when he calls out for you." A flash of pain crossed Olivia's features before she could mask it. "He didn't need me when I was growing up. The piano always came first, his students, his performances, his reputation. I was just an afterthought." The bitterness in her voice transported Anthony back to his own days as Mr. Davies' student, remembering the long hours of practice while a young Olivia lingered in the doorway of the music room, waiting for a moment of her father's attention. But he had also witnessed countless small gestures of love, the way Davies' eyes would light up when Olivia played, how he kept every drawing she made carefully preserved in his desk. He was imperfect, yes, but he tried in his way. Anthony said softly, "Do you remember the lullaby he composed for you when you were small? He still plays it sometimes, even now when other memories are fading. His fingers remember what his mind struggles to hold on to." Olivia's composure wavered slightly. "The Moonlight Sonata for Little Stars," she whispered. "I didn't know he still played it." Anthony pressed gently forward, sensing a crack in the walls she had built. "The house is being restored. Mark Evans is leading the renovation project. You remember Mark? He was one of your father's students during that difficult period after your mother passed. The troubled boy who used to skip lessons until Dad started teaching him jazz instead of classical." A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips. "He was always good at seeing what people really needed." "He was, and still is in his lucid moments," Anthony said. "Sarah tells me that even now when he's confused about other things, he lights up when students come to play for him. The music reaches him when nothing else can." Olivia stared into her coffee, conflict evident in the tension of her shoulders. "I'm not that little girl anymore waiting at the music room door. I've built a life without him." "No one's asking you to be that little girl again," Anthony assured her. "But perhaps it's time to build something new, not to erase the past, but to create a different kind of future, while there's still time." The rain continued its gentle percussion against the window, as Olivia wrestled with decades of complicated emotions. What would it mean to step back into her father's life now, when he was no longer the commanding presence who had dominated her childhood? Could the father and daughter who had drifted so far apart find their way back to some kind of harmony? "The community has rallied around him," Anthony continued. "Former students organize regular concerts in the parlor. The local music society helps maintain his piano. Even the neighborhood children bring their recital pieces to play for him. But there's still an empty space that only you can fill." Olivia's fingers traced the rim of her cup, a gesture so like her father's habitual movement across piano keys that Anthony's heart clenched. "What if he doesn't recognize me?" she asked finally, vulnerability creeping into her voice. "Then we'll help him remember, one note at a time," Anthony replied. "Sarah has discovered that photographs and music often trigger his memories, and even when words fail him, his heart knows what his mind cannot express." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of possibility. Outside, the rain began to ease, letting weak sunlight filter through the clouds. Would Olivia take this chance to create a new movement in her father's symphony? Or would the music between them remain forever unfinished? The autumn breeze carried the sharp scent of fresh paint and newly cut wood through the Victorian windows of Mr. Davies's home. Mark Evans stood in what was once a deteriorating music room, now transformed into a space that seemed to breathe with renewed life. The renovation project, which had started as Sir Anthony Hopkins' mission to honor his former mentor, had evolved into something far more profound than mere structural repairs. Sarah Jenkins observed the transformation while organizing Mr. Davies's sheet music into the newly installed shelving units. Each piece of furniture, every restored floorboard, and all the carefully selected materials spoke of the dedication that Mark had poured into the project. Who could have imagined that the troubled young man who once sought refuge in Mr. Davies's piano lessons would become the architect of this restoration? The project had drawn unexpected support from the community. Former students of Mr. Davies, upon hearing of the renovation through Anthony's network, had contributed in various ways. Some sent financial support, others volunteered their time, and many shared stories that painted a vivid picture of the impact the old piano teacher had on countless lives. These stories became the invisible threads weaving through the fabric of the restoration, giving each repair a deeper meaning. Mark's attention to detail reflected his understanding of music's importance in the house. He had designed acoustic panels that complemented the Victorian aesthetics, while ensuring optimal sound quality for the grand piano that dominated the music room. The instrument itself, recently restored under Anthony's supervision, gleamed in the afternoon light, its ebony surface reflecting the newly installed chandelier. Sarah noticed how the renovation seemed to affect Mr. Davies, despite his condition. Though his dementia often clouded his recognition of people and places, he appeared more settled in the improved surroundings. Could the familiar creaks of the floorboards, now stabilized but not eliminated, be acting as anchors to his memories? Did the fresh paint and restored wallpaper somehow help orient him in the present, while honoring the past? The transformation extended beyond the physical structure. As workers moved through the house, completing final touches, there was a palpable sense of anticipation. Anthony had informed Sarah about Olivia's upcoming visit, and the renovation's timing couldn't have been more perfect. The house that had witnessed years of estrangement between father and daughter was being prepared for what everyone hoped would be a new beginning. Mark had taken special care with Mr. Davies' study, preserving elements that held particular significance. The built-in bookshelf where he kept his most treasured scores remained intact, though carefully restored. The window seat where he used to compose still offered its view of the garden, now enhanced by new weatherproofing and subtle modern comforts. Would these familiar touches help bridge the gap between past and present for both father and daughter? The renovation team had discovered old photographs tucked away in various corners of the house during their work. Sarah had carefully preserved these findings, creating a chronological display in the hallway. Images of a younger Mr. Davies teaching, performing and sharing moments with his family now lined the walls, telling a story that words alone couldn't convey. Among them were pictures of Olivia as a child, sitting beside her father at the piano, their shared joy frozen in time. As the project neared completion, the house seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The fresh paint dried, new fixtures settled into place, and updated systems hummed quietly in the background. Yet beneath these modern improvements, the soul of the house remained intact, ready to welcome its inhabitants into a new chapter of their story. What would Olivia think when she saw her childhood home renewed? How would the careful balance between preservation and progress affect her perception of the place she had left behind? The answers to these questions hung in the air, adding another layer of anticipation to the project's completion. The transformation of the house mirrored the potential for transformation in the lives of those connected to it. Just as Mark had evolved from a troubled student to a skilled craftsman, and just as the house had been restored from decay to dignity, perhaps the relationship between father and daughter could also find its way to renewal. The stage was set, the space prepared, and all that remained was for the principal players to take their places in this unfolding drama of reconciliation and restoration. As autumn leaves painted the Welsh countryside in brilliant hues, Sir Anthony Hopkins stood in the newly renovated music room of Mr. Davies's home, his fingers trailing across the restored Steinway piano. The transformation of the once deteriorating house mirrored the changes taking place in the lives of those connected to the elderly piano teacher. But would a gathering of former students be enough to bridge the remaining gaps? Sarah Jenkins arrived, early that morning, carrying a stack of old student records she'd discovered while organizing Mr. Davies's study. "Sir Anthony, you wouldn't believe how many lives he touched," she said, spreading the yellowed papers across the polished piano lid. "I've counted over 300 students spanning 4 decades. Together, they began the delicate task of tracking down former pupils, many of whom had scattered across the globe. Anthony focused particularly on those from the years when Olivia was young, hoping their memories might help piece together the fragmented relationship between father and daughter. Each phone call revealed new layers of Mr. Davies' impact, with stories of patience, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to his students' growth. Mark Evans proved invaluable in the preparation process, leveraging his local connections to spread word of the upcoming gathering. "The community remembers him, Sir Anthony," Mark explained while installing new lighting in the performance space. Even those who never took lessons knew of Mr. Davies' reputation for nurturing talent in unexpected places. The logistics of organizing such an event while maintaining Mr. Davies' daily routine required careful coordination. Sarah adjusted his schedule gradually, introducing small changes to prepare him for the increased activity. Some days, he seemed to grasp what was happening, his eyes lighting up at the mention of former students. Other days, the confusion returned, leaving them to question whether the gathering might overwhelm him. Olivia's response to the invitation remained uncertain. After their initial breakthrough, she maintained cautious contact through occasional phone calls, but had yet to commit to attending the reunion. Anthony recognized the delicate nature of her hesitation. How does one face a room full of people who knew you before the fracture, who might carry their own versions of your story? As preparations continued, unexpected connections emerged. A violin maker in Vienna who credited Mr. Davies with saving his musical career offered to send a quartet of instruments for the gathering. A renowned conductor in London, another former student, volunteered to lead an impromptu orchestra of willing participants. The response exceeded their initial hopes, transforming the planned intimate gathering into a celebration of musical legacy. Sarah worked with local caterers to plan refreshments that would accommodate the growing guest list while ensuring Mr. Davies' comfort. He always served Welsh cakes during lessons, she remembered, adding them to the menu. Said music needed something sweet to balance the discipline. The question of repertoire sparked lengthy discussions between Anthony and Mark. Which pieces would best honor their teacher's influence? Should they include the challenging works he was known for assigning, or focus on the simple melodies he used to build confidence in beginners? They finally decided to create a program that would flow like one of his lessons, starting with fundamental pieces before building to more complex compositions. As the day approached, Anthony found himself increasingly drawn to the piano in quiet moments, practicing the pieces that Mr. Davies had once taught him. The muscle memory remained intact, but the emotions attached to each note felt different now. What had once been exercises in technique had become threads in a larger tapestry of influence and connection. The renovation team, under Mark's guidance, added final touches to ensure the house could accommodate the gathering. They installed temporary seating in the music room, created space for instrumental storage, and established quiet areas where overwhelmed participants could retreat. Each decision balanced practical needs with an understanding of the event's emotional significance. Local music shops, hearing of the planned celebration, offered to provide additional instruments and equipment. Former students who couldn't attend sent letters and recordings to be shared during the gathering. The response revealed how Mr. Davies' influence had rippled outward through generations of musicians, teachers, and music lovers. But would the gathering serve its deeper purpose? Could the harmony of shared music help heal the discord between father and daughter? As Anthony reviewed the growing list of confirmations, he wondered if they were creating something more than a simple reunion. Perhaps this was an opportunity to demonstrate how music could bridge the gaps that words alone couldn't cross. The morning light filtered through the newly restored windows of Mr. Davies' home as Sarah Jenkins made her final preparations for the day's momentous gathering. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the fresh flowers on the piano, knowing that within hours the house would witness a reunion decades in the making. Would Olivia Davies truly come after all these years of silence? Sir Anthony Hopkins stood in the entrance hall, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. The distinguished musician had orchestrated countless performances throughout his career, but none had filled him with such nervous anticipation as this carefully planned reunion. He recalled his conversation with Olivia just days before, when she had finally agreed to attend the gathering of her father's former students. Her voice had carried both hesitation and longing, a combination that spoke volumes about the complexity of her relationship with Mr. Davies. Mark Evans moved quietly through the house, making last-minute adjustments to ensure everything was perfect. The renovation project had become more than just a job for him. It was a chance to repay the man who had once given him direction when he needed it most. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder about Olivia, the daughter he had heard so much about but never met. What kind of reconciliation could emerge from years of estrangement? The first former students began arriving, their excited chatter filling the house with warmth. Mr. Davies sat in his favorite chair, his eyes bright with recognition one moment and clouded with confusion the next. Sarah stayed close by, watching for signs of distress, but today seemed different. The music floating through the air from the practicing musicians appeared to anchor him in the present, each familiar melody drawing him back from the fog of dementia. When Olivia's car pulled up outside, Anthony felt his heart skip a beat. Through the window he could see her sitting there, hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel. Would she find the courage to take these final steps? The moment stretched out, heavy with possibility and fear. Then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders straightened, and she opened the car door. The house fell quiet as Olivia stepped inside, her presence commanding attention without a word. She looked so much like the young woman in the photographs that still adorned her father's walls, yet carried herself with a grace that spoke of the years and experiences that had shaped her. Her eyes immediately found her father, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Mr. Davies looked up, and in that instant his face transformed. The confusion that had become his constant companion melted away, replaced by a clarity that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Olivia?" he whispered, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "My little songbird?" The nickname, unused for so many years, broke something open in Olivia's heart. She moved forward, each step bringing her closer to bridging the gulf that had separated them for so long. What thoughts raced through her mind as she approached the man who had taught her to love music, the father she had both fled from and longed for? As she knelt beside his chair, Mr. Davies reached out with trembling hands to touch her face. The gesture was so gentle, so full of wonder, that several of the gathered students had to look away, overcome by the intimacy of the moment. Olivia leaned into his touch, and words began to spill from her lips, words of regret, of love, of forgiveness, long withheld. Anthony watched from the doorway, his heart full. This was what music could do: break down walls, heal old wounds, bring harmony to discord. The gathered students began to play softly, a piece that Mr. Davies had taught them all, their individual parts weaving together into something greater than themselves. The music seemed to wrap around father and daughter, creating a space where years of hurt could begin to heal. Olivia's hand found her father's, and together they listened, allowing the melody to say what words could not. In that moment, as the sun streamed through the windows and the music filled every corner of the restored house, something profound shifted. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Olivia and her father, but for all those whose lives had been touched by the magic of Mr. Davies's teaching? The answer lay in the tears that flowed freely down Olivia's cheeks, in the way Mr. Davies's eyes remained clear and focused on his daughter's face, and in the knowing smiles exchanged between Anthony, Sarah, and Mark. Sometimes, the most beautiful symphonies are composed not of notes but of moments like these, moments of redemption, of return, of love reclaimed. The late afternoon sun filtered through the newly restored windows of Davies's home, casting warm light across the assembled faces of former students, friends, and community members who had gathered to celebrate the completion of the renovation. At the center of it all sat Mr. Davies at his beloved Steinway, his fingers hovering above the keys with familiar anticipation. Sir Anthony Hopkins stood nearby, watching his former mentor with a mixture of joy and concern. Would Davies' mind be clear enough today to play? The past few months had seen dramatic improvements in his condition. The familiar surroundings of his restored home and Olivia's return had seemed to anchor him more firmly in the present, but his good days remained unpredictable. Sarah Jenkins caught Anthony's eye from across the room, offering a reassuring smile. She had witnessed firsthand how music could still break through the fog of Davies' dementia, even on his worst days. The melody might be imperfect, but the soul of the musician remained intact. Mark Evans leaned against the doorframe, his contractor's eye taking in the restored crown molding and fresh paint with satisfaction. But more than the physical transformation, he marveled at the human restoration that had taken place within these walls. How many lives had Davies touched through his teaching? How many troubled souls, like his own years ago, had found their way through the discipline and beauty of music under Davies's patient guidance? Olivia placed her hand gently on her father's shoulder, and something in his posture shifted. Recognition flickered in his eyes as he turned slightly toward her touch. The tension in the room was palpable. When was the last time Davies had performed for an audience? Would this moment bridge past and present, or highlight what had been lost? Without warning, Davy's fingers descended to the keys, and the opening. Notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room. The familiar melody emerged not with the technical perfection of his younger years, but with something perhaps more precious, the distilled wisdom of a lifetime spent in service to music and its students. Anthony found himself holding his breath, transported back to his first lesson in this very room. How many times had he watched those hands demonstrate a particularly challenging passage? How many hours had he spent trying to emulate not just the notes, but the deep understanding of music that Davies possessed? The performance wasn't flawless. Occasionally, Davies' fingers would falter or a phrase would be simplified. But there was an authenticity to it that moved many in the audience to tears. This wasn't just music. It was the story of a life dedicated to teaching, of relationships healed, of community restored. Sarah noticed how the audience leaned forward during the quieter passages, as if drawn into a shared, intimate conversation. Even those who had never studied with Davies seemed to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just a musical performance, but a moment of profound connection between father and daughter, teacher and students, past and present. Marx thought about the symbolic parallel between the house's restoration and this moment. Just as they had preserved the essential character of the building while making it whole again, Davies' playing retained its fundamental beauty, despite the ravages of time and illness. Some things, it seemed, were too deeply ingrained to be lost entirely. As the final notes faded, silence held the room in its grip. Davies sat motionless at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. Then Olivia wrapped her arms around her father's shoulders, pressing her cheek against his. The spell broke and applause filled the room, not the polite acknowledgement of a performance but the outpouring of love and gratitude from lives transformed by one man's dedication to his art and his students. Anthony watched as Davies slowly rose from the piano bench, supported by his daughter. The older man's eyes were clear now, present in a way they hadn't been in months. He looked around the room, taking in the faces of his former students, and for a moment, it seemed as if all the years fell away. This was why they had worked so hard to restore the house, not just to preserve a building, but to create a space where healing could happen, where music could continue to work its magic, where a lifetime of teaching could find its final, perfect cadence. As the final notes of Mr. Davies's impromptu performance faded into memory, Sir Anthony Hopkins found himself confronting the delicate challenge of securing his beloved mentor's future. How could one adequately protect and provide for someone who had given so much to others throughout their life? The morning after the gathering, Anthony met with Sarah Jenkins in the newly renovated study of Davies' home. The warm sunlight streaming through the restored windows seemed to underscore the brightness of possibility, despite the weight of their discussion. Sarah, her dedication evident in the careful way she organized Mr. Davies's medication schedule, shared her observations about his increasing needs. His lucid moments are becoming more precious, Sarah explained, her voice carrying years of both professional and personal investment. Yesterday's performance was remarkable, but it took so much out of him. She hesitated before continuing. We need to consider more comprehensive care options. Anthony nodded, his mind already working through various scenarios. The success of the renovation project, spearheaded by Mark Evans, had created a solid foundation. But what about the human element? The house stood restored, yet the more crucial task lay in ensuring Mr. Davies would receive the care he deserved. Olivia Davies, having witnessed her father's performance the previous day, had remained behind after the gathering. Her presence in the house marked a significant shift in the family dynamic. After years of absence, she found herself drawn back into the orbit of her father's life, though uncertainty still clouded her eyes when she spoke about the future. Anthony orchestrated a meeting with financial advisors and healthcare specialists, carefully laying out a framework that would protect Davies' interests while maintaining his dignity. The plan included provisions for in-home care, with Sarah continuing her role but supported by additional professional caregivers. Who better to maintain the delicate balance between medical necessity and personal comfort than someone who understood both the man and the musician? Mark Evans, whose own transformation from troubled student to successful contractor stood as testament to Davy's influence, offered to oversee any future maintenance the house might require. "It's the least I can do," he said during a meeting with Anthony. "This house gave me a second chance, just like Mr. Davies did." The community's response to the renovation project had revealed a network of former students and admirers eager to contribute to Davy's well-being. Anthony worked with local musicians to establish a fund that would ensure regular piano maintenance and the continuation of small musical gatherings, knowing how vital music remained to his mentor's spirit. Olivia's involvement proved crucial to the arrangements. Her initial reluctance gave way to active participation as she witnessed the depth of care and consideration being invested in her father's future. Could the very process of securing her father's care become the bridge that would finally span the years of separation? Sarah coordinated with Olivia, sharing insights gained from years of caring for Davies. The two women found common ground in their desire to protect and nurture the gentle soul who had shaped so many lives through his music and teaching. Their collaboration created a comprehensive care schedule that would ensure Davies was never without familiar, loving presence. Anthony's legal team crafted documents that would protect Davies' interests while respecting his dignity and autonomy during lucid periods. The arrangement balanced necessary oversight with flexibility, acknowledging the unpredictable nature of dementia while preserving opportunities for Davies to engage with music and teaching when able. The financial structure Anthony established drew from his own resources but also incorporated contributions from the community of former students and music lovers who had been touched by Davies' influence. This approach ensured sustainability while honoring the collaborative spirit that had characterized the renovation project. Through careful negotiation and planning, Anthony created a support system that extended beyond mere financial security. The arrangement encompassed emotional, artistic, and social elements essential to Davies' well-being. Would this comprehensive approach provide the stability and dignity his mentor deserved? As the plans took final shape, Anthony observed the subtle ways in which the process had affected all involved. Sarah's dedication found new purpose, Mark's commitment to the house deepened, and Olivia's return to her father's life gained stronger foundation. The future, while uncertain in many ways, now held the promise of security and continued connection for the man who had given so much to others. In the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight streaming through the newly restored windows of Davies' music room, an unexpected moment of lucidity emerged like a melody breaking through discord. Mr. Davies, who had spent months drifting between past and present, suddenly focused his eyes on Sir Anthony Hopkins with startling clarity. "Anthony, my dear boy," Davies spoke, his voice carrying the familiar warmth that had guided countless students through difficult passages of music decades ago. "You've been here all along, haven't you?" The question caught Anthony off guard, stirring emotions he had carefully contained throughout the months of orchestrating Davies' care. How many times had he wished for such recognition from his beloved mentor? How many conversations had he attempted, only to be met with confused stares or references to long-past lessons? Sarah Jenkins, who had been adjusting Davies' medication, schedule nearby, froze in place, hardly daring to breathe. These precious moments of awareness had become increasingly rare, making each one feel like a gift that could shatter at the slightest disturbance. "Yes, Mr. Davies," Anthony replied softly, moving closer to his former teacher's chair. "I've been helping to look after you." Davies' eyes, usually clouded with confusion, sparkled with understanding. "The house, you fixed it. And Mark, he was here too, wasn't he? The troubled boy who couldn't sit still during his scales?" A small chuckle escaped him, the sound so familiar it transported Anthony back to his own lesson days. The mention of Mark Evans brought a smile to Anthony's face. Who would have thought that the restless student would become the master craftsman, responsible for breathing new life into Davies' beloved home? The renovation had become more than just a construction project. It had evolved into a symphony of healing, bringing together those whose lives Davies had touched. Davies' gaze drifted to Sarah, recognition flooding his features. "And you, my dear, you've been so patient with an old man's wandering mind." His words carried the weight of gratitude that extended beyond the present moment, encompassing all the countless hours Sarah had devoted to his care. But it was his next words that made Anthony's heart constrict. "Olivia," Davies whispered, his voice catching. "I saw her, didn't I? Or was that another dream?" Anthony exchanged a quick glance with Sarah before responding. "She's been here, Mr. Davies. She comes to visit you now." How could he explain the complex journey that had led to this reconciliation? The careful conversations, the gentle persistence, the gradual thawing of old hurts? Davies nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. Music brought her back, didn't it? Just as it always brought everyone back. His fingers moved slightly as if playing phantom keys on an invisible piano. Music has a way of healing what words cannot. The profound truth of that statement resonated through the room. Hadn't it been music that first connected them all? The lessons that went beyond scales and arpeggios, teaching life's deeper rhythms and harmonies? "I want you to know," Davies continued, his voice growing stronger. "What you've done. All of you. It matters, the music we shared, the lives we touched." His words trailed off as he struggled to maintain his focus, but his eyes remained clear, fixed on Anthony's face. Sarah moved closer, sensing the importance of this moment. How many times had they wondered if Davies understood the impact he'd had on their lives? How many times had they wished they could tell him what his guidance had meant to them? "We're here because of you, Mr. Davies," Anthony said quietly. "Everything we've done, the house, the care arrangements, bringing everyone together, it's our way of thanking you for what you gave us." Davies' eyes began to show signs of fatigue, the clarity slowly fading like the final notes of a beloved piece. But before the moment slipped away entirely, he reached out and grasped Anthony's hand with surprising strength. "The music will continue," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Through all of you, it will continue." As the sun's rays painted long shadows across the room, Anthony felt the weight of those words settle into his heart. Wasn't that the true measure of a teacher's legacy? Not just the lessons taught, but the way they lived on through generations of students, each adding their own variations to the original theme. The moment passed, as such moments must, with Davies' attention drifting once again to distant memories. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had been acknowledged and honored. In that brief window of clarity, they had all been reminded of the invisible threads that connected them, woven together by music, strengthened by care, and sustained by love. The autumn breeze carried the faint melody of a piano through the newly restored windows of Davies' home, where inside a small gathering had assembled for what would be Anthony's final visit before returning to his international concert schedule. The past months of renovation and reconciliation had transformed not just the physical structure, but the lives within it. Anthony watched from the doorway as Olivia sat beside her father at his beloved Steinway, their hands moving together across the keys in a simple duet they had played countless times during her childhood. Mr. Davies's fingers, though slower now, still found their way through the familiar patterns with surprising grace. What made this moment particularly poignant was the look of recognition in his eyes as he turned to smile at his daughter, one of those increasingly rare moments of clarity that everyone had learned to treasure. Sarah Jenkins stood nearby, her caretaker's instincts ever present as she monitored Davies's energy levels. Though her role had evolved since Olivia's return, the two women had developed an unexpected partnership, sharing the responsibility of Davies' care with a complementary understanding of his needs. Would this arrangement continue to strengthen as time passed? The answer seemed written in their synchronized movements and shared glances of mutual respect. Mark Evans, who had transformed from troubled youth to respected craftsman, was making final adjustments to the newly installed crown molding, his attention to detail reflecting the discipline Mr. Davies had instilled in him years ago. The renovation project had become more than just a job. It had been his way of repaying a debt of gratitude to the man who had once believed in him when few others did. The house itself seemed to breathe with renewed purpose. Gone were the water-stained walls and creaking floorboards. In their place stood restored hardwood floors that gleamed beneath carefully preserved period lighting, while the walls displayed a carefully curated collection of Davy's musical achievements. Programs from memorable concerts, photographs of successful students, and treasured sheet music annotated in his distinctive handwriting. Anthony reflected on how this journey had begun with a simple visit to his former mentor and evolved into something far more meaningful. How many lives had Mr. Davies touched through his decades of teaching? The evidence surrounded them, not just in the successful careers of his students, but in the very character they had developed under his guidance. The community's involvement had exceeded all expectations. Local musicians regularly stopped by to play for Davies, creating an ongoing concert series in his living room. Former students sent letters and recordings which Olivia would read and play for him during his more lucid moments. The house had become a sanctuary of music and memory, exactly as Anthony had envisioned. As the duet concluded, Davies turned to Anthony with that familiar twinkle in his eye, the same look he had given countless students before offering a particularly insightful observation about their playing. For a brief moment, the years seemed to fall away, and Anthony could almost imagine himself as that young student again, eager for his teacher's wisdom. But now their roles had shifted, though the deep connection remained unchanged. The time had come for goodbyes, though Anthony preferred to think of it as a pause between movements rather than an ending. How would Davies' story continue to unfold in his absence? The foundation had been laid, not just in the physical restoration of the house, but in the restoration of relationships and the creation of a support system that would endure. Olivia approached Anthony with tears in her eyes, words of gratitude caught in her throat. But between them passed an understanding that transcended the need for speech. They both knew that while Anthony had initiated this transformation, it was the love for Davies, the teacher, the father, the mentor, that had made it possible, and Anthony stepped out onto the porch. The sound of the piano followed him. Mark had taken his turn at the keys, playing one of Davies' favorite Bach preludes. The music spoke of continuity, of tradition passed down through generations of teachers and students, of lessons that extended far beyond the technical aspects of playing an instrument. What greater legacy could a teacher hope for than to see his influence ripple outward through the lives he had touched? Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.